600 years ago, on a plain in northern France, two armies met to do battle. A battle that would not only change the war itself, but it would change history and the art of warfare forever. Today I will be presenting about the Battle of Agincourt. I will describe the events that caused the war to happen, then talk about the events that led up to the battle. I'll describe the battle itself, and then argue why the battle ended the way it did and how that changed warfare forever. So the Battle of Agincourt was part of a war called the 100 Years' War. And this war was primarily fought between the kingdoms of England and France. So why did this war begin? We can trace this war back to the 1100s, at least the reasons for the war. And it's when an English king named Henry II married a French princess named Eleanor of Aquitaine. So this marriage brought many French lands under English control. And before the marriage, this is what France looked like. A little bit of English control in red and a little bit of French control in blue. But after the marriage, England owned over half of France, while France barely had any control themselves. And this outraged the French people. To add insult to injury, the French king Philip the Fair died, and he left no true heirs to the throne. His closest relative was actually the English king at the time, Edward III. So Edward III claimed the French throne, and this again outraged the French people. And a couple of other reasons for this war was there were some trading disputes here in northern France, and also the control of the English Channel right here between England and France was disputed between the two countries. So eventually, in 1337, war broke out. And the English king at the time, Edward III, immediately went into France and took the offensive in this war. He quickly won the battles of Crécy in 1346 and then the Battle of Poitiers in 1356. And things were looking really good for the English in this war. However, shortly after these battles, Edward III and his son, who was next in line, both died. So this left an empty space in the English leadership and monarchy. So while there was this empty space in the monarchy in England, France decided to retake some of the land that they had just lost. And after that, the war was kind of at a stalemate and nothing major happened for a while. It wasn't until the early 1400s when another monarch came into power, an English monarch named Henry V. And Henry V wanted to break the stalemate of the war and end it for good by invading northern France. And he did just that. He took 10,000 men and he sailed across the English Channel and sieged a town called Harfleur right here in northern France. The siege lasted about 2 months, and they eventually took control of the town, but they lost 4,000 men of the 10,000 to disease and malnourishment. But Henry V, being the enthusiast that he was, decided to march on, and he set his sights on a big city in northern France called Calais, an important port to the French. So, along the way, Henry V and his now 6,000-man army marched town to town, raiding and sacking these towns' supplies and food, just so that he could sustain his army. And all the while that he was marching, a French army was paying close attention to the English movements, making sure that they didn't go too far. And eventually, this little French army that was watching them thought the English had gone too far and decided to gather their armies together and confront the English. And they confronted the English about 40 miles south of Calais, near a town of Agincourt. This here is a satellite image of the battlefield in 2018. Here's the town of Agincourt, and here's the town of Trincourt. And the battle was fought right about here on this flat plain in between these two towns. And here's a first-person view of what the battlefield looks like today, but it did probably look close to this in the 1400s when it took place. There's trees in the background and trees on the side right here, too. So the two armies did meet face to face on October 25th, 1415. So let's take a look at the composition of the two armies and how they differed. First, let's talk about the small English army of about 6,000 men. 1,000 of the 6,000 were the infantry, which were just armored soldiers that wielded axes and swords and shields. 5,000 of them, the majority of the army, were these longbow men here, who had 6-foot-tall bows and they shot arrows hundreds of yards. And they also employed these little stakes right here to stop any horses from charging into their lines. Now, across the battlefield stood a very, very large and well-equipped French army. Estimates put their size of about 25 to 30,000 men, 5,000 of them being armored cavalry, which were men on horses that would charge the English lines, hopefully, and win the battle for the French. The rest of their army was mainly crossbowmen and, again, some armored infantry. So the two armies did get into position in between these two towns here, and the English front line was comprised of some longbowmen and some infantry mixed, and also they hit some infantry in the woods nearby on either side of the battlefield. They did this in order to provide some flanking fire into the center of the battlefield upon the charging French. The French are up here at the north of the battlefield. Henry V ordered his archers to start shooting at the French right away, because that's all he really could do. And all this did was annoy the French. So they charged at the English lines, but they got stuck. Many nights before this, there had been lots of rain, so the ground was still muddy. And horses running and men running don't mix well with mud. So they got stuck. And while the French cavalry and infantry were stuck running through this mud, they were exposed to just death raining upon them, thousands of arrows hitting them, and men were dying left and right. And eventually, the French army did slowly get to the English line, and they started fighting hand to hand. But the French were already tired by then. So they fought for about 2 hours, and that's when the battle really ended. The French were so tired because of that trudge through the mud that they had to retreat. And it actually left about 8,000 French dead, compared to just the 900 English who died. But how can this be if the armies were so different, the French having almost a 5-to-1 advantage on the English? So I have about 3 reasons why the battle turned out the way it did. The first, as I had mentioned previously, was the mud. If it weren't for the mud, the French charge would have probably wiped out the English line. But they did get stuck and were exposed to the English arrow fire. The second reason lies in leadership. The French army didn't really have a central authority to look to take orders from. And because of this, there might have been miscommunication and misdirection on the battlefield, which could lead to many deaths, unwanted deaths at that. And also, on the English side, they did have Henry V, which is one of the most famous generals in history. William Shakespeare even wrote a play about him called Henry V. And the last reason, and probably the most historically known and significant reason, was the use of the longbow. The longbow did a ton of damage and provided most of the deaths on the French side. And what was weird in this battle is up to this time, longbows and archers were not seen as an honorable soldier. They were seen as poor and cowardly because they would kill an enemy from hundreds of yards away. And the code of chivalry didn't really permit that. And also, arrows did not discriminate. They could kill a noble in armor just as good as they could kill a simple peasant just wearing rags. So that was very important. So after this battle, armies started using longbowmen because they could do so much devastating damage so quickly and far away from a safe distance. So in the 1500s, with the invention of the musket, those were employed in all the battles. And as we know, in the American Revolution, the British and the Americans both primarily used muskets and ranged weapons. Hand-to-hand combat was basically obsolete. And 200 years after that, at the Battle of the Somme in World War I, tons and tons of men, thousands, died because of artillery. They were killed miles away. And even to this day, Militaries across the world utilized mainly guns, artilleries, and weapons such as that. So in the end, the Battle of Agincourt not only took the war in another direction, but it changed history and how warfare would be fought forever. Thank you.